Welcome to the Soul Path Sessions podcast with Deborah Meints-Pierson and Brenda Littleton. Brenda is an educator and counselor rooted in Jungian and eco-psychology. She helps her clients understand the importance of the mind, body, spirit, and earth relationship for healing. Deborah is a licensed psychotherapist and has been trained in traditional and sacred psychology, exploring from the ground up what makes our human experience meaningful, wholesome, and enlightening. Deborah and Brenda invite you to accompany them on a soul path journey as they explore the possibilities of living a more soulful life as therapists, seekers, and lovers of fate.
This is Deborah Meints-Pierson and Brenda Littleton on Soul Path Sessions. And today in our discussion, we're going to be looking at the relationship between mood and food, how mood follows food, and looking at the gut-brain relationship.
A juicy topic indeed.
We're not really talking about diet, although we are talking about nourishment.
In every sense of the word.
Yeah, so we're going to be looking at a couple of studies, some of our own phenomenology as far as our experiences with clients in groups, as well as some poetry that has been a form of nourishment for both of us as well.
Yes.
So, this topic is of great interest to me, not only for my own health and healing and with my body, but professionally. When I first became a therapist, I had transitioned from being a professor at a university in graduate studies and pretty much secure in what my role was and the material I was going to share. And I came from a place of understanding. And when I became a therapist, I was beginning all over again at 54. And I wouldn't say insecure, because a lot of my work as a therapist was teaching, but my first 3,200 hours was at a domestic violence shelter clinic program that was based not only in providing education, psychoeducation to the community, but we had a safe house and we had extended 2-year programs where women and their children could live and re-enter society. And I did a lot with how they did that transition. And one of the things that I observed when dealing not only with domestic violence and the trauma, multi-generations, we had grandparents, parents, and children in the safe house, but looking at the lack of awareness of health and some of the primary situations that we dealt with were children and their mothers dealing with deep depression and deep chronic anxiety for obvious reasons. Most of the clients did not have health insurance, and so it was really up to us, the staff, the clinicians, to create a pathway for their movement forward, and not only in their safety, but how are they going to move forward with new behavior and new choices. And I took some postdoc work with Dr. Leslie Korn, and Korn, and I'm always interested in how last names match up what people do. But it was the beginning of my commitment in looking at not so much diet, but looking at the microbiome and looking at how the gut-brain relationship really influences mental health. And I was lucky enough that I had a supervisor who was completely behind the idea of looking at diet and the biochemical, the psychobiotics of food, and not so much the types of, like what kind of meals that were being prepared, but what type of processed foods, high refined fructose, sugar, non-essential carbs, and other microbiotics had a chemical effect on the house, the actual ability of the house to have a calm, safe, clean energy in the house. We had maybe 20 women and an equal amount of children. And I was able to provide education, psychoeducation on the microbiome. And we had this 2-year experiment where we really tried to eliminate the processed food, the refined foods, the high sugar, and just observe the nature, the pulse of the house, the sense of anxiety and depression. And it was phenomenal, the difference.
Were they given choices, or just kind of remove processed food from the choice?
Once the education was shared and the women, the clients would actually go and shop, they would buy nature to make, so it was all part of the awareness, being mindful and trying. And the idea is that many of our clients would stay for 2 weeks, or some would stay for 2 years. And what would they take with them? And my goal was to allow the sense of choice to be tried on and lived and phenomenologically imbued in their body, so that if their children were depressed, or if they themselves had high anxiety, that they could actually, instead of going, because they didn't have medical insurance, so they didn't have the pharmacology support that other people might turn to, and because of their the lack of safety, there was a very high concern, high anxiety about being seen in public. So there was a lot of multiple layers involved in trying to create a safe space for them.
Why would they be afraid to be seen in public?
Being stalked.
Okay.
Yeah, being stalked.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we had a lot of attacks that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Terrifying.
So, and Leslie Korn, Dr. Korn, has done a lot of work in inner city work in dealing with clinic and doing psychoeducation. But her basic premise is that mood follows food. And she's not the originator of this. I'm looking at a report here by David Cohn from The Atlantic, who's talking about a health article about when gut bacteria change brain function. And as it starts out, it says it's not new. I mean, we understand that how different chemicals affect the brain, but what I like to see, what I'm seeing, is that there's a wider scope of understanding how the microbiome in the gut definitely affects the neurotransmitters, and that our neurotransmitters, the ones that we rely on in our brain health, for serotonin, for oxytocin, for there's this sense of cortisol in how our blood system is flooded. Most of those beginnings don't begin in the brain or in the thymus or in the adrenals. They begin in the gut. And how the gut lining is affected by what we put into it definitely has an affect as far as how it affects our mood. So I'm constantly looking for material on depression, anxiety, hyperactivity. I was a psychologist in the local school district where most of the cases I were given were hyperactivity, aka ADHD, but yet if you were to actually do a diet analysis, not so much based on protein, fats, or carbs, but what type of processed foods, what chemicals, what food coloring, what additives were in the child's system from morning till night, and then equate it with their behavior and their learning adaptability, there is a very clear case and correlation. And so we still promote sugar. We still promote the refinements.
Yeah, we don't.
No, we don't. But society.
It has been true. I came of age when the space age came of age. So there was dehydrated food. It was more full of sugar. It was modern. It was easy packaging, so women didn't have to be locked in the kitchen because they had appliances, and there was cake mix. You still had to mix it. But there was more sugar in the food than your grandmother might have used. And there was this whole idea of oppression, like women's rights. You don't have to be oppressed. You can be out and about. My mom was a golfer. She was a good cook, by the way. She knew about nutrition. But it just sort of, it crept up. There was Coca-Cola. There's Jell-O for the astronauts, all that dehydrated Tang instead of orange juice. You know, that stuff is really addictive.
God, I forgot about Tang.
Oh, I love Tang. I don't have it anymore, but I loved, you just add water, Nestle's quick.
Yeah.
Quick, it was quick.
Speed. Well, this brought home, a few years ago, and I think I mentioned before in some prior conversations of breaking my back. I was living a life of breaking my back, and I broke my back. And it took me a while to not have a broken back and broken ribs. And I had a surgeon who scheduled me for pretty important surgery, saying that there's just too much inflammation. Your nerve endings are not mending. You have the possibility of the one wrong move on a horse or even in yoga, you'll be paralyzed for the rest of your life. Yeah. And she gave me 6 weeks to make a decision as to a date for surgery. And I was headed off to Hawaii. I wanted to go boogie boarding, and she just said, you can be paralyzed by one wrong move, by the heightened level of inflammation and the irritation to your central nervous system and your backbone.
She got your attention.
Oh yeah, the whole episode got my attention, and I said, I just downloaded the idea that I'm going to have to make a change here, and I found it really ironic. Me, who had been so ardent in my own diet, into my own exercises, into my own yoga practices, and blah, 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 blah. And here I was facing being paralyzed as well as major surgery. And I just downloaded to look at a few options, and Dr. McDougall came up. He was interviewed for the movie Forks Over Knives, and basically was one of the many people feeding that information. And I just followed his advice of no oil, no flesh, no dairy. And I thought, I can do, if I had broken a leg, I'd be wearing a cast and I would be a therapeutic moment. So his philosophy was to create an anti-inflammation diet for anybody, for anything. And I thought, well, I have high inflammation. He's an expert in non-inflammation. I'll follow this and see what happens. The worst scenario is it's not going to work and I'm going to have surgery, and that's it. Well, within 2 weeks, following his recommendations, which was more elimination than adding anything, I had no pain in the hands. Long story, I went back after 6 weeks, and the surgery was canceled, and I was able to go body surfing in the Big Island. I did not, so it really reinforced the idea of the gut-brain biome connection with respect to inflammation. And so most of what I see in articles, and perhaps it's self-selection because it's something that's of importance to me, is how inflammation is the primary predator in many of our imbalances, whether it's arthritis in our fingers, but the body is dumping the pain. And we know what it's like when we're dealing with patients and clients that are just riddled with pain. Life is impossible.
And animals instinctively know this. They'll be put off their food. They'll go out in the yard and eat grass.
Yeah.
They'll instinctively know and just turn towards what they need. And it's getting back to the garden. It's getting back to the garden. My beginning, my grandmother was a healer, so she always said whole foods. I mean, she didn't say whole foods because that wasn't a thing. It was food. And she would take she would grate every kind of vegetable known to humankind that she would work with, and that's what your salad was. Food was clean, and it was prayed over. It was made with love and intention and light. And so when I go to Grandma's house, we ate I didn't think I liked okra, but I was kind of picky eater. But if Beta, called her Beta, if she made the okra, I just eat it. I drink the liquor off the bottom, not liquor, like liqueur. And, it would just be the best. And so that came up through my cells to know that. And when we would get sick, she would fast us. So you didn't eat. You could, she knew this. She studied deeply in her own fashion, because she lived through the pandemic of 1917. And she learned all about these things, body brushing and all kinds of things. So I grew up with an innate knowledge of that, but I had incredible resiliency as well. As a young person, I could eat and drink pretty much what I want, do whatever the hell I want. It felt pretty damn good.
Youth.
I look back on it now and say I probably wouldn't have had such painful menstrual periods had I understood that my mom just said that's the curse, But we were eating more processed food. We had ding dongs, ho hos, Lay's potato chips, all the junky stuff, Oreos. She still make cookies, but as I got older, there'd be less of that kind of stuff. It got more into the culture. I came home from school, just eat whatever I wanted, Coke and Lipton soup mix with sour cream.
Yeah.
I would just eat the whole thing. And so, I didn't make the connection. That comes later in life. So I think it was really fortunate for those women that were in your program for you to understand the healing power of food. And sometimes we have to be reintroduced to it. I've gone through periods of forgetting. And when I was really young, in my 20s, I got violently sick. And I started to study. I'd had an operation. I'd had a hysterectomy. And I started really putting the maths together about it. And I studied Ayurvedic. It was the best thing that ever happened, really. I already had my kids, so it was fine. But I started studying Ayurvedic medicine and from India, 6,000 years old, and really looking at the type of body, the type of symptom, the type of food. So they have these things called doshas, or body types. And I took the little quiz. I read all about it. And I started going, I want to heal. Really, this scared me really badly. And I didn't know I couldn't even fathom having a tumor. So I came back to my grandmother's wisdom, right? Like you can heal yourself. And then I studied macrobiotics, which is Japanese, Mishokushi. And I did things like fasting, like my grandmother taught, the vegetable broth. For listeners out there, you can just get a vegetable broth, and you can heal your body just by having vegetables in water. Just any vegetable you really feel like. And then just drink my grandmother would call it, drink the liqueur. And get warm. And that's all you live on.
Yeah.
You just fast that way, and then if you feel a little better, you can eat the vegetables. They last quite a long time. You can sit them out on the stove, and they don't go bad. You put onions, but they're naturally fine.
Ginger.
Yeah, if you can handle ginger. I don't think she added ginger. She said in the beginning, just put vegetables, and then drink the broth. So I can buy. What you're saying is so important, and a lot of people don't have that historical precedent.
Well, what I see also is that when I'm sitting with friends and they're stressed and they're trying to decompress, they're consuming a lot of like popcorn or potato chips or, things that taste good, that sound good, that give comfort. But then there's this immediate hyperactivity or a headache, or there's a pain in the back. There is this direct result. The affect.
It's so true. Anita Johnson wrote this incredible book called Eating by the Light of the Moon. And it's about eating disorders. And she said, if you're craving something, describe what you're craving. Oh, I want ice cream. Well, what's ice cream? It's sweet and it's soft. Mother's milk.
Yeah.
So crunchy, salty, earth, anger. Connect the emotions. So the textures of things that you crave have a lot to do with what you were deprived of. And so a lot of my clients are abused. Obviously, they come to therapy because they were abused, abuse history. And I ask them, what do you crave? They have eating disorders. They want soft and creamy mother's milk. Mommy was gone. Earth and grounding, daddy's presence. They'll find a food that hit the spot. And you used to have that phrase. Yeah. It hits the spot. Yeah. And it allowed them to survive trauma. But it has something to do with the actual taste, texture of the food itself.
So I would go into that spot and ask the image of the spot to give me advice, to give me like, you arrived, you're here, and I crave you. What can I do for you? And when I was on this McDougall, I guess I would call it a diet. It was pretty stark, and yet I learned to crave it because it satisfied the pain. And I learned at that time how to go into the pain. I had to lean, not to avoid it. I couldn't take any pain meds. I tried some tramadol, and it did help, but the other stuff it would just make me worse. It made me more sick. So I just had to, there's a lot of pain present, and I'm eating potatoes, like little tiny potatoes, no butter, and just warm, and just that sense of that my Irish coming out, being held by the land. And I found this every bite I would swallow, it was, I am satiated, I am cared for, and I would lean into the pain, and the pain became, you hear that term bright as pain, the brightness that takes over. And I asked the pain, would it, instead of coming in and dumping in my body where I would become logged, like when I think of a log in water, kind of logged, but waterlogged, and just slow and decrepit in pain, I said, and I made a deal with it to convert it into the brightness of light. So the bright light of pain, and going into that light and being surrounded by that light, and being really in recognition of the light of that pain. And it didn't happen right away, but it happened within a couple of weeks of being so overwhelmed with this pain. And also it took a couple of weeks of me not putting food into my body that contributed to the endurance of inflammation, that I had a breakthrough. And it wasn't a breakdown. It was, again, it's not so much having the light come into us, but my feeling is our light is able to come out through our cracks. And that pivot provided the encouragement and hope of going forward and knowing that it was going to be okay. And I saw that also with a few of the clients in the domestic violence program. It's like, I get it. My kids go to sleep at night. I can sleep at night. We wake up and we're happy. It's, it's still the same fearful world out there, but I am better prepared. I'm grounded, and it adds to their sense of resiliency. And so there's this beautiful understanding of food is a psychobiochemical, and if we take care of our gut, and how we inform our body by what we put into it, it will assist in this homeostatic place of balance.
Right. It's true. Mood follows food.
Yeah.
Pepsi, pep you up, Pepsi. See, that's what we do with our culture. We're like, Pepsi, you want a pepper? You want to take Dr. Pepper? Pepper.
Well, we want to avoid it.
Well, people now, it's like, Starbucks. The long lines for caffeine when the body might be naturally tired. So we've learned to override our systems.
Yeah.
And overriding the system consistently leads to breakdown of the microbiome, that little world, that little tiny world that lives inside your little tiny tummy. And just sort of seeing it like this little world and getting information on it. And I think this is really an important center of our show, is that it's a small world after all. And these little tiny dudes, that tiny bacterium, live inside, and they're jamming. And if you eat certain foods, they get more of them, and they're healthy. And they're healthy because you feel good. Sometimes you find out the hard way that it doesn't feel good to your microbiome. And you can also supplement with probiotics. You can get really nice probiotics, which I take in the morning. And I kind of do it intuitively, if that makes sense. I'm not like a super Yeah. Well, sometimes I do muscle tests, actually. Yeah, muscle test. You want to tell them what muscle testing is, Brenda?
Oh, well, David Hawkins wrote a couple, I think he has like 22 books or so of the calibration of energy. He was an MD that became, I believe, a physicist as well. Perhaps I'm wrong on that, but he was an MD. And there's lots of free YouTubes of Hawkins.
Oh, no.
He's everywhere. He passed away about 4 years ago in Sedona, but
Perfect place for him.
it is. Yeah. He's still there.
Yeah.
Anyways, he was part of a research and papers at both Stanford, I believe, and his work grew into kinesiology, and kinesiology grew into more sports medicine as opposed to psychology. But there's, with the advent of somatic psychology, there's somatic psychology relies a lot on calibration.
Soma body.
Yeah, soma, and anything to do with the body. And Hawkins created a way of testing an individual. You can do it yourself, or you can work with a client or a friend by holding out your arm and holding an object, a piece of food, or I do this when I'm in Whole Foods or something and I'm buying a nutrient, a supplement, and I put the jar under my armpit and I hold it and I make a circle with my fingers and make what is that called?
A link.
A link, thank you. And you just pull. And if you pull easily, that means you really don't need it. It's a low frequency for you, a low calibration.
Start with yes and no.
Yeah, yes, and you pull hard. So
You go, is my name Deborah?
and then you test it,
And then I go, is my name Bob?
and it falls off.
It falls off. So the subconscious tells you if it's good for you.
And it is a form of intuition as well, but it's reading the frequency, and it's not a woo-woo thing. It's you can actually, I mean, if you Google Hawkins and watch him in some of the early work in the early 70s, he gives great demonstrations. And one of his main books is Power versus, and it's available in all forms. And then the next one to follow up with that would be Letting Go. And it's more of a integral in a practice of power versus force.
I thought it was all hooey, actually, because it didn't work for me. I just, when I was younger, I was like, not that. I was just kind of like, well, people are just doing that, I wanted, ice cream, yeah. So I didn't go for it. I didn't understand. So when I went to do my pranic healing, which is working with energy in my PhD program, I was introduced. I thought, this is going to be some easy units here, man, because I know everything about energy, big deal. And the first thing they had us learn was to feel our energy. And then they did muscle testing too. And I just went, okay. But actually, as I got more into it, I was like, no, there's something to this. And played with it. And also in advanced integral work, we did muscle testing to know when the person was releasing. We did it with one finger on a thumbnail. You just kind of flick it.
Yeah. I don't get much with that.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
But
if you only got one hand or something and you're writing it. So I did that, and I still do it. It kind of comes and goes for me, but it's definitely one of the ways to be insightful. Insight. To pay attention to what's happening on the inside. But getting back to the way I learned to measure energy on food, for me, it was just to put my hands on it. After I learned to activate my hands by rubbing them together and then slowly pulling them apart and then slowly and intentionally asking to feel my inner aura.
Yeah.
Aura meaning the auric body around the physical body. And if you do it slow enough and intentionally enough, as you bring your hands together after rubbing them together, you'll feel a little sponginess. It'll tell you how, if you divide it in half, how far your aura is from your body. And so once we got good at that, we got good at just working with our chakras and learning to feel. We learned on other people. But to cut to the chase, when we go to lunch, we learned how to measure the prana in our food. So we just put our hands, we go to a Chinese restaurant together, and put our hands down, and you could feel, if it was alive, like vegetables, lettuce, it'd be way out from the bowl. If it was dead, like packaged food, and you just close your eyes, you just kind of be way down there. So you can, I learned to sensitize my hands, and it was just so rad because getting high, we all want to get high. I learned that too. We all want to get high, but in our culture, we get high by doing a bypass of the body, right? That's Western culture, modern Western culture. So this idea that by eating, by being aware of the prana in my food, taking it in, my body would then reflect, that what you eat, you are. So I'd feel very expanded. And then I'd measure my aura after lunch. My belly chakra would be a little bit full because it was digesting food, and it would have definite effect. So it's just another way into this idea that mood follows food.
Absolutely. And some discrepancies come up when I've worked with people who actually do Reiki on their food, or they feel the energy of the food and they eat it anyways, even if it's low energy. and it's like, I have to eat it, and so then they do. And that's for the sleepiness and the digestion afterwards.
It's called scientific investigation.
Yeah. One last little tidbit on the Hawkins, the muscle testing. I love working with people who don't believe it. I mean, like maybe I'm introducing it for the first time, and you can just see on their face, it's like, you are so full of shit. And I'll just say, stand up. Just stand up and put your arm out, and then I'll do the same, like, your name is, and their arm will resist, and I'll push down and push down and push down, and they are in their truth, and their arm stays up. And then I will say something like your name is Batman, and immediately, and the look on their face is...
And you tell them to hold firm.
Yeah.
Put your arm out and hold firm.
Like, resist me.
Yes and no. Yeah.
Yeah. Just resist all your might. And they can't. And that moment of it's their own phenomenology. They've embodied a new place. They will never not know now what they know. And it's the look. And it's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and it can be surprising. Because I remember one time I was in, kind of hearkening back to this idea that different foods at different times do different things. I was in New York City, and I was in Manhattan. And we toured every single possible thing you'd fit into a day, and we had a couple shows. We were going to go to at night. It was just like a lot. And I just lost my energy. And I was laying down in the Natural History Museum on a bench, which was my daughter's like, this is so uncool.
Mom, you're embarrassing me.
Yeah, right. There's like people like walking by, traditional Hasidic people with their bonnets and stuff. And here the mother, I'm like, dude, I got to take care of myself. And then I just laid there and I went, Coca-Cola. And I went into the cafeteria, and it was just the right thing. It wasn't an everyday thing. I can't remember the last time I had a Coca-Cola. But I had that Coca-Cola, and I felt awesome.
Boost you up.
It was just, I don't know what's in it, because it's really secret. It's a secret syrup. It's actually guarded. It's the most best kept secret. I mean, really vaulted information. I don't know if it'll ever be the seal will be untaken, but you can't get that taste anywhere else.
The old Coca-Cola had the old Coke.
It had cocaine in it.
Yeah.
Coke syrup, but the actual recipe is one of the most guarded secrets in the world. Like
Didn't know that.
nuclear code.
And nuclear code.
And when they try to change it, people don't like it.
Well, I think that's all the other types of recipes that they send out, like light this and light that. Right? So how long did it revive you?
Just long enough to hail a cab and get to the show.
Yeah.
I felt good. I just listened to my body, and sometimes my body will give me weird things, but you have to learn that. I mean, that was just I learned it. I went, Coke? Really? I don't do Coke. Coca-Cola.
Well, you did then, And it seems fitting to be in Manhattan and
Fast.
Yeah, fast and effervescent. And,
5 days.
Yeah,
See it all.
Dash. Yeah.
Dash. So sometimes you can do stuff, but it's like listening to the body. For me, it took getting sick. Really sick.
Besides nutrients, the other forms of nutrition, not just the biome in our gut, but I do believe my gut is activated when I am appeased and satiated by other forms of nutrition, other forms of diet, is the sense of music, the sense of being in the garden, and the relationship with poetry, having a diet of poetry, a sense of poesis, having a life built around poesis, of sensuality, the natural form of balance, color. I work a lot with essential oils, and not the heaviness, but the sense of being activated in certain ways. And I know I'm compelled to sign up for the David White, the 3 weekends of his work, and just to be around his energy of poetry and listening to him speak and listening to him give a lecture and being with other people who also appreciate the same form.
Yes.
And you and I were both watching, what was the American Poets.
Oh yeah, the Academy of American Poets. Their fundraiser.
That
was so cool.
Yeah, it was.
We have that in common. We love it.
And after watching, you wrote a poem.
Oh, I did. Well,
Yeah.
the poem wrote me, and I just take dictation in this
Okay.
way. So I guess you're cueing me up.
I am. I'd love to hear that poem, because the idea of poetry as being a form of nutrition and nutrient, I think, is important. It's important to both of us.
Yeah. So I had this experience, and what I really experienced was a lot of things. And so the subconscious process was, of course, at work. And the subconscious process wrote this poem, and I laughed. Okay. After watching the American Academy of Poets Gala fundraiser, I ate a bag of poems today. Greasy, crunchy, salty, sweet. I didn't know what savor came next. I was taught to eat one at a time. Just eat one, they advised. Don't go back for seconds, thirds, fourths, 50 helpings or more. Some swallowed barely tasting. Some hit my belly like nails. Thank you for the flavor of my ignorance, the oracle of my opinion. Served up hot and sizzling, seasoning my licked fingers and gorged after holiday dinner bloat. I reached in until they were all gone. Stopped to pick kernels from my teeth, taste them again. Even if I bit into something sharp, even if I gasped for air, I pressed for crumbs. I ate a bag of poems today.
I love it. I just love it.
I actually got a little sick just because I was eating so many of them.
It was a pretty full special.
Full plate.
Yeah.
Full plate. But I couldn't turn away. I just kept overeating them because I wanted to see it so badly.
And I watched it again. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes. For sure.
So beautiful work, beautiful poetry, beautiful response of being in the moment. So tell me how you felt. I know how I felt when I was watching this amazing collection of, it wasn't in a one venue, it was cutting into each person's space in their own home. And it was, I guess Zoom or something like that. And seeing a poet or seeing different people read different poems, not all their work.
It's so funny you should say it, because a poem that made me cry was a Mary Oliver poem about peas. I just remember the line about peas. I can't even tell you the poem. I can't appease you with the poem. But when she started talking about these peas, I had the tears running down my face, and my husband just left the room. It was too much for him at that moment that I was breaking down over the peas.
So there's a gut-brain biome. The sense
Something
of
about innocence and tendrils of peace. It just didn't matter. But you know how you have Thanksgiving? You eat, well, at least most people, you eat without thinking. It's a day of engorgement for most people in America. And it's at a certain point towards the end, I was just like, I'm going to be sick. But I want more. What if the next one is a digel?
So what would happen if we filled ourselves up in poetry every day? I mean, I would love to. I did sign up after that. I did sign up for a poem a day. So I do start my day with a poem a day.
Good.
Even though I used to write them, now I read them.
Yeah.
But I think it's a good experiment. The idea of where can we slide in a slice of poet.
I think it's absolutely right on. I mean, I went to school to become, well, I was interested. I found out I was interested. I always written poetry my whole life. And so this is, at this stage, kind of going back to our show prior, I've created space and poems wrote me. So it's both and. David White, of course, yes, yummy. He got us through the pandemic with the Sundays and, This is called soul food.
Yeah.
Soul food comes in many containers. Soul food comes in many iterations. But this is the thing. It's a lot of different conversations.
And that concludes this week's episode of the Soul Path Sessions podcast with Deborah Meints-Pierson and Brenda Littleton. If you'd like to hear more about living a more soulful life, please subscribe to our channel on your favorite podcast app, and be sure to check out the show notes and links below. For more information from Deborah, visit soulpathsessions.com, and for Brenda, brendalittleton.com. Thank you for listening, and remember to follow your soul. It knows the way.